Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and the subject of today's video is far different from what we've covered in the past. When you really think about it, what do you imagine a convicted killer to look like? Maybe someone with a troubled past or an unkempt appearance? Someone that looks pretty rough around the edges, right? Better yet, maybe someone like Ted Bundy. A man who kept himself cleanly put together and could swoon any man or woman that came near him. But could you have ever imagined that a vicious killer may also be a world-class athlete? O.J. Simpson aside, it's pretty unusual to hear of a killer who had, all things considered, a pretty good home life. But that's the case with Oscar Pistorius. Oscar was a professional sprinter who, despite having a disability, led a life of fame and fortune. However, all of that came crashing down when he was convicted of murder back in 2014. Let's take a look into the controversial case of Oscar Pistorius and his dramatic fall from grace. Though he may now be rotting in a prison cell, Oscar was once a man who had it all. He was born on November 22nd of 1986 in South Africa. Oscar found tragedy when he was still very young. He and his mother were incredibly close, but she lost her life when Oscar was just 15 years old. He was forced to live the remainder of his teenage and young adult years without a mother figure. What truly set Oscar apart from other kids his age was that he was born with fibular hemilia. This is a very uncommon medical condition that caused Oscar to be born without a fibula in both of his legs. Most people would probably consider this a terrible tragedy, but Oscar never let it bother him. Thankfully, his doctors were able to diagnose the condition when he was very young, so he began treatment at just 11 months old. He underwent surgery to have the lower portion of both his legs removed. This was to keep him from sustaining serious injuries later on in life, and would also make it super easy to fit him for prosthetics in the near future. And that's exactly what happened. Oscar was given a park of prosthetic legs and lived a completely normal childhood. Not only that, but he lived a highly active childhood as well. He would play all sorts of sports in his younger years, even taking up rugby during his first few years of school. He could later go on to play sports like tennis and water polo, but he really had a knack for wrestling. One of his wrestling competitors said that it took him several months to even notice that Oscar was an amputee. He was just as competitive and capable as the rest of the team. By 2003, Oscar's entire life changed right in front of his eyes. He had been playing rugby one day when he sustained a serious knee injury. Considering his legs were already his weakest link, Oscar was afraid that this new injury may cause him to be unable to walk or run normally again. However, he made a full recovery and, following the recommendations of his doctors, decided to switch his path in sports and become a runner. He started running just 6 months after his knee injury, and according to his coach, Oscar never looked back. This was a particularly great sport for Oscar, not only because it gave him an outlet and means of getting some serious exercise, but he was also able to be fitted for running blades that would make the sport feel far more natural for him. These blades would fit onto the lower portion of his legs, much as a prosthetic leg would. After graduating high school, Oscar would go on to attend college and major in business management, as well as sports science. However, his studies were not his primary focus. For Oscar, all he wanted to do was find a career as a professional runner. Fast forward a few years and Oscar would go on to win countless awards for his running ability and managed to win the gold medal in the 2004, 2008, and 2012 Olympics in various competitions. By all means, Oscar was a remarkable athlete with abilities that most traditionally abled people could only dream of. However, by 2013, Oscar's world would change forever as he found himself caught up in a traumatic situation that he would not soon get out of. Throughout his adult life, Oscar was able to hold his relationships together like any normal person. Despite his physical setbacks and his personal life as an athlete, he still managed to find time for that special someone. Oscar had been dating a young woman named Riva Steenkamp for quite a few years. Riva was well known in South Africa and was a popular model and paralegal. Riva's career was cut short on Valentine's Day of 2013 when her boyfriend Oscar shot her 4 times in his home. Riva had been in the restroom and locked the door behind her. Oscar approached the restroom door and fired 4 shots through it, with 3 of these shots striking Riva. Immediately afterward, Oscar broke down the door and soon realized what he had done. When speaking with police officers, Oscar said that he thought Riva was an intruder, so he shot at the locked door. This excuse has been called into question many times over the years. The first person to arrive at the scene of the crime was Oscar's neighbor, who tried his hardest to stabilize Riva and keep her breathing. However, he said that she showed no signs of a pulse and he wasn't able to do anything to save her. Paramedics were called to the scene, but it was far too late by the time they had arrived. From the very beginning of the case, Oscar openly admitted to police that he had shot his girlfriend, but he maintained that it was in self-defense as he thought she was an intruder who had broken into his home. Oscar was arrested for murder regardless of what he had told police, and he was taken to trial in March of 2014. This trial was supposed to determine whether Oscar had willingly taken the life of his girlfriend or if he had been telling the truth and the crime had actually been an accident. It seemed as though Oscar was having a difficult time convincing the courts that he was innocent of homicide. To try to help his case, Oscar's defense team called in a psychiatrist to testify on his behalf. In the past, this psychiatrist had allegedly diagnosed Oscar with generalized anxiety disorder, so there was a chance that his anxiety got the better of him, causing him to fire shots toward the restroom without first checking to see who was inside. However, these claims were dismissed almost immediately, and the court saw no reason why Oscar's anxiety would have caused him to commit such a terrible crime. By September of 2014, Oscar's case had taken many twists and turns. He was first being charged with homicide, but these charges would change midway through the trial. Prosecutors knew there was no chance of committing him of such a thing, so his charges were changed to culpable homicide. It seems like this is a charge handed down when a person knowingly commits murder, but under false pretenses. For example, killing someone because you believe they broke into your home, only to find out later that they were your loved one who had the key. At the end of it all, the courts found Oscar guilty as charged, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for the culpable homicide charge. Even though Oscar had been sentenced to prison for 5 years, he was recommended for early release as soon as June of 2015. He'd only served 1/6 of his sentence when prison officials and prosecutors began to try their best to allow him to serve the remainder of his sentence under house arrest. He was granted early release almost immediately, and he was scheduled to be released on August 21st, 2015. However, this release was blocked at the last minute, with it being overturned on August 19th. Prosecutors became concerned that his release would set a precedent for other cases, but he was later released in October, though the law still forbade him from participating in competitive sports until his sentence had been fully carried out. Though, once again, this case would switch gears unexpectedly. A motion was filed that claimed that Oscar's original sentence was far too light, given the events that unfolded. The courts felt that the judge had been too lenient with Oscar and that his jail time did not reflect the severity of his actions. And most importantly, that justice hadn't been served to Riva and her loved ones. It would be brought to attention that the judge had overlooked a law that should have seen Oscar locked away for a minimum of 6 years. This law claims that a person who knowingly committed a murder, regardless of the reasoning behind it, must face a minimum sentence of 6 years. The prosecutors argued that no matter who was behind the door of Oscar's bathroom, he knew that firing 4 shots into the door would end their life. In the end, the Supreme Court agreed with this and renewed Oscar's sentence. He was now to be removed from house arrest and once again placed in prison to live out the remainder of his sentence. He would only be eligible for parole after serving 3 years of the sentence, meaning he would be locked away until 2019 at the earliest. If you thought this would be the end of Oscar's case, you'd be terribly wrong. It seemed as though someone in the court system had a personal vendetta against Oscar, as they continued to push for him to receive a much longer sentence in prison. Successful in their push, Oscar was then given 13 years and 5 months behind bars. This new sentence guarantees that Oscar will never see the light of day until at least 2023. By all means, this sentence effectively ended his professional running career. By the time he is able to compete again, there is a chance that he will be far too old to keep up with his competitors. Even though I'm sure he's staying active and doing the best he can behind bars, there is no cure for age, and that is something that should always be considered in sports like this. As soon as Oscar heard about his new sentence, he immediately filed an appeal to have his original sentence reinstated. However, his appeal was immediately denied and his new punishment was upheld. Even though Oscar's defense team did a great job of painting him to be an innocent man who simply did his best to protect himself, the story isn't so simple. In fact, many people believe that Oscar willingly took the life of his girlfriend after an argument. Riva's family spoke out in 2015 after the original murder charges were dropped. Her parents claim that Oscar was known to have violent outbursts and was an angry man. They believe that he lashed out at Riva after having been in an argument and took her life out of sheer rage. They spoke with The Independent about their beliefs, and they said they firmly believe that he fired the gun that day with intent to kill. Riva's father, Barry, said, "What actually came out in court is not the truth. He got angry. She went off to the toilet, locked herself inside, and then pulling out the gun and shooting." Riva's mother chimed in and asked, "Why didn't he just let her walk away?" With these accusations from Riva's family in mind, we have to remember we don't have any reason to believe that Oscar's actions that day were in self-defense. Or do we? If we take a closer look into Oscar's past, we can see that some of the accusations made by Riva's parents could make a lot of sense if we put them into a much larger context. For example, eOnline.com reported that Oscar had a history with police intervention at his home. If we take things back to 2008, we can see that Oscar was traveling way too fast in a speedboat. He ended up crashing the boat and seriously injuring his face, causing him to see surgery and 180 stitches to patch himself back up. There were never any charges filed for this incident, but witnesses say that Oscar had been drinking heavily that day. Fast forwarding a bit to 2012, we can see that Oscar was questioned by police after he allegedly fired a gun through the sunroof of a moving car. This was one of the many charges that Oscar was in court for back in 2014. Police say that Oscar was no stranger to officers visiting his home. They reported that they visited Oscar numerous times in the past regarding domestic disturbances. We don't know the nature of these disturbances, but more often than not, these situations play out when a neighbor hears a pretty intense argument taking place inside a family's home. In one incident, Oscar reportedly slammed his door on a young woman's leg when she refused to leave his home in 2009. She was obviously injured as a result of this and filed charges against him, but the charges were later dropped. In 2012, the New York Times reported that Oscar seemed to be a person who believes himself to be royalty of a certain kind. This reporter also claimed to have evidence of Oscar driving down a highway going 155 miles per hour, seemingly having no regard for the other drivers. The New York Times also reported having an interview with Oscar shortly before Riva lost her life. While at Oscar's home conducting this interview, the reporter says that Oscar revealed that he had broken up with Riva, but the reporter noticed that another young woman had already been staying at his home, even though they'd broken up just less than a week before. He asked Oscar about his guns, asking how often he would shoot them. Oscar reportedly replied, "Just sometimes when I can't sleep." He was a world-class athlete with a career unlike anything we've ever seen, but it seems as though there could have been a lot more going on behind the scenes than meets the eye. So, did Oscar truly plan on killing Riva that day? We may never know for sure. The two had been together for a very long time, and Oscar even told one of his friends that he felt as though Riva may be the girl he decides to marry one day. Though it seems that fate had different things in mind and Riva's life ended far too soon. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Oscar Pistorius. Oh, and Why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on the screen for another one of our videos.